You are listening to the I Choose My Best Life podcast with Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, a show that is dedicated to helping you live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally. For additional resources, visit ichoosemybestlife.com.
How can you keep your energy, happiness, creativity, and relationships fresh and thriving in the midst of never-ending family demands, career pressures, and the stress of everyday life? Learn about best-selling book Sacred Rest and discover the 7 types of rest you need most by visiting restquiz.com. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Saundra, and you're listening to I Choose My Best Life. Today, we are chatting with Dr. David Bilstrom. He is the director of the International Autoimmune Institute and a functional medicine physician that's going to help us to really go a little bit deeper into how do we determine our next steps if we have been told you have an autoimmune disorder. And so, Dr. David, I'm so excited that you're here because I think too often we hear these terms and it's like we think we know what the doctor is saying to us, but we are not sure. And I know a lot of people turn to Dr. Google, which is not always the best resource to get more information. So let's start just from the very beginning. When someone hears that they have an autoimmune disease, what does that mean?
The classic autoimmune disease, we'll go back maybe like a decade and earlier. So the classic autoimmune situation is we have 2 parts of our immune system. One is called the adaptive immune system. So the adaptive immune system will make antibodies to attack things that are not us, that are going to try to hurt us. So if an infection gets in, let's say we get a cold virus, that virus is not us. It's just going to try to make us feel sick. So the immune system will make antibodies specifically against that virus to attack it, kill it, get it out of our system so that maybe we only have a cold for 4 to 5 days versus 20 years, right? And so historically, if the immune system gets somewhat confused, it may start making antibodies actually attacking our own body parts and then destroying those body parts. And so maybe a classic example might be like rheumatoid arthritis, where you're attacking the joints, or Hashimoto's, which would be attacking the thyroid, multiple sclerosis attacking the brain. Other ones might attack the connective tissue that's connecting to everything, and it goes all over the place. And it can attack the skin, which is psoriasis, this kind of thing. But over the last 10 years, maybe probably even longer, we now realize that the other part of the immune system, called the innate immune system, is really important at controlling inflammation. So it turns out if you have inflammation, excessive inflammation in a body part, that body part's not happy, you have a health issue there. Hey, I got some brain stuff going on. You got excessive inflammation in the brain, joints, skin, gut, you name it. And so it turns out that so many, if not all disease actually is tied into this immune system thing, including things that we never would have thought had an autoimmune immune system component, like heart attacks, stroke, osteoporosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. But you name it almost, including 70% of all autism is one particular autoimmune disease. And maybe an example for the listeners might be, heart attacks. It's inevitable that you're going to get hardening of the arteries. There's inflammation in the vessels. You're getting older, your degeneration and aging goes on. You're just going to get hardening arteries and be set up for a heart attack. But even 2 decades ago, articles started coming out and saying there's nothing degenerative, there's nothing inevitable about heart attacks and hardening arteries. It is an autoimmune, infectious, inflammatory process. So it's the immune system. And because the immune system is disrupted, infections that drive chronic disease are allowed to drive this inflammation and drive disease. And so when we're talking autoimmune, we're really talking all disease, all the classics, but all the ones that nobody wants, there's an immune system component.
Yeah, I've been in internal medicine for about 20 years, and it was really interesting that as I was coming out of residency, we had these really specific ways of approaching things. And it was right around that time when all of a sudden, all of this conversation started about inflammation. And just as you stated, the more we started looking at things and the more we were able to see just the effect inflammation had on the entire body, I think it really revolutionized not just like traditional medicine, but everything from how we eat to how we engage with our environment. So I would love to hear from you when we are approaching that, when we're looking at approaching these autoimmune diseases, as you mentioned, include so many different levels of it. What is a good first step for reversing some of the inflammation?
I think it's really important that people understand that the science is very clear that we know where this stuff comes from. And because of that, we know how to reverse the process and start turning things around. Now, unfortunately, when most people might get a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease that's a classic or any chronic disease, they may ask, how did I get this? And oftentimes, unfortunately, they're told, we have no idea what just happens. How can I make it go away? There's no way you can do that. You're stuck with it forever. And unfortunately, it tends to get worse and worse over time. And so I think one of the things we got to get over is we really truly know where chronic disease and autoimmune disease comes from. And because of that, we're in a position to reverse it. So I think the first question people should always ask is why? Why did I get this? Unfortunately, the science tells us what we need to know with that. Never just go, oh, this is how it happens and I'm stuck with it forever. What am I going to do? You want to always ask why, and the science and the right testing. I always like to say, let's test so we don't have to guess, because the body, even though it's very complex, it's also very logical. And there's a logic behind why this stuff happens that we can use to start reversing the process, or in a perfect world, it'll prevent it from happening in the first place. Because if chronic disease is in your future, boy, is it hard to stay healthy nowadays. If you're not doing something actively to keep that from happening, you're trending in the wrong direction.
Now, when someone gets to that point where they're ready to begin to make those next steps, where would you say epigenetics, what role does that play in that process of that's the initial evaluation?
Oh, I love your question. We have a free online educational email course with 7 emails, each one about a 6 to 8 minute read. The very first email, each one takes a deep dive into why this stuff happens. So we're really trying to educate people why this happens and then give them the tools that they can actually either prevent it or reverse it. The very first email is about epigenetics. And we used to think that our genes, our DNA, that tell the cells what to do was hardwired. Whatever we got wise from parents and grandparents, we're stuck with it. Hopefully, looking at my parents and grandparents, we go, I hope I got the good genes, not the bad ones, because they got some stuff I don't really want as they age. It turns out it's not what genes you have for the most part, it's which ones get turned on and turned off. And so epigenetics, to your point, is the things that alter gene expression without changing the genetic code itself. And so it turns out there's ever so many bad genes in our cells, ever so many good genes. What we want to do is turn off the bad, turn on the good, so that every cell in the body is being told the correct information. But things that drive chronic disease will turn on the bad, turn off the good, and then cells are being told the wrong information. And it's a really good example of how once you start getting one health issue, then here comes a second and a third and a fourth. And you're like, holy cow, how can all this stuff be going on at the same time? It's all the cells are being told the wrong information. And one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating is the science behind the epigenetics of the X chromosome. So if I can say that 80% of people that get autoimmune disease are women, you go, holy cow, why might that be? And there's 2 major reasons probably why that is. And one is epigenetics. So it turns out the X chromosome has so many bad genes on it. So women get 2 X chromosomes in every cell. Guys get 1 X, 1 Y. Well, it turns out for a woman to be optimally healthy, she has to shut down at least 85% of this entire second X chromosome in every cell in her body. Otherwise, there's excessive X chromosome influence on disease progression. That is a big task. Almost an entire gene has to be shut down in every cell. That's tough.
That is. And I think that kind of leads us over into that conversation regarding estrogen dominance and just the effect that it has on disease and overall health. Explain that a little bit for someone who may not be familiar with that term.
Hormones such as estrogen, like you mentioned, hormones keep away inflammation. And by doing that, they keep away disease. Estradiol, for example, one of the 2 main estrogens in women, estradiol, that will keep away heart attacks and keep away strokes. And it keeps away cataracts, macular degeneration. It keeps away osteoporosis. The gut needs estradiol, but also keeps away fine lines and wrinkles on the skin. But hormone balance is almost more important than which hormones you have. And the second reason we think that 80% of people that get autoimmune disease are women is estrogen dominance, which is too much estrogen relative to progesterone. So progesterone, they call it the quieting, calming hormone. Once again, great for the brain, great for the eyes, great for the bones. The textbook that everybody gets in their first obstetric gynecology course in med school, one of the first things they say is an example of how important hormones are is every cell in the body has progesterone receptors. Every cell needs progesterone. Guys and women, women more. Same thing with estrogen. But if you get too much estrogen compared to progesterone, oh my gosh, is that a central mechanism in disease? In women, I call it the most dangerous disease for women. If you look at the top 10 reasons why women died, almost 90% of those reasons can be tied into estrogen dominance. About the only one that isn't part of that is accidental death, getting in a car accident, for example. But every other one, there's a tie-in. And estrogen dominance drives all hormonal menstrual issues, whether it's bad flows, bad cramps, PMS, ovarian cysts, polycystic ovarian syndrome, fibroids, endometriosis, fibrocystic breast disease, infertility. That all has a tie into too much estrogen relative to progesterone, estrogen dominance. And when you look at that, you're like, holy cow, almost what woman doesn't have that nowadays. Now,
Exactly.
a couple generations ago, a decade or two ago, I had women in their 80s who their entire reproductive life, regulars all get out, no big deal. And then all of a sudden menopause came. And how'd you know you had menopause? I stopped having cycles. And that was it, right? You never hear that story nowadays. It's so hard to be healthy. But the other thing is because estrogen revs and progesterone calms, you get rev without calm things, such as excessive worry, anxiety, panic attacks, and insomnia. And you look at that, you go, holy cow, what woman almost doesn't have some of that as well? So it is super common. And so that is driving so many things. And when women get the rev without calm stuff, when they get the hormonal menstrual things, what we want to say is, why do I have this? Let's get at the why and let's get rid of it, because each one of those things is terrible individually. It's whoever wants that, right? My life is so much more complicated because of that. But because it disrupts the immune system, if people are getting that, we know where they're going. We know what their future looks like, and it looks like autoimmune disease, but also a huge increased risk of cancer. And this is where they talk about cancer being the flip side of the same coin that's autoimmune disease, because it's immune system disruption. And so women, let's say that have estrogen dominance before menopause, they have a 5.4 times greater risk of getting breast cancer before menopause. Doesn't just double the risk or triple. We're talking about 5 times. And I'm like, if I'm watching the ticker on the morning news programs and something came across the bottom, something was identified as doubling the risk of breast cancer in women, you go, oh my gosh, this is a godsend. We now know we could do, we're talking 5 times. And it increases the risk of malignant cancers, ones that metastasize, lifelong, 10 times. So this is a huge issue, but we want to educate people what it looks like in the early stages. Let's fix it before it ever gets to the cancer, the autoimmune disease.
So I get this question a lot from women because, as you mentioned, it is just prevalent in our culture right now. The amount of people who deal with this, some level of estrogen dominance related side effect or symptoms. And one of the things I hear very often is that, oh, well, my doctor says there's, like you said, there's nothing I can do about that. That's not something that there's anything they can do. I'm just getting older. I just have to live with it. What are some natural or holistic approaches that women can begin to use or to do to begin to improve that situation?
Yeah, it is so common. And unfortunately, oftentimes women are told that's just part of being a woman. So I hear a lot of stories about teenagers who are like in high school and they're in class and all of a sudden they didn't know their flow was going to start because it's so unpredictable and all this, that right in their desk, they're sitting in a pool of blood, menstrual blood. And they go to the school nurse. They can't really do anything. They say, hey, we have these pair of white workout pants, sweatpants. I'll give you, so instead they give them white pants again. And this, oh my gosh, that's the worst color. And then they go to the doctor and say, oh my gosh, this was terrible. Oh my gosh, emotionally, it was so terrible. And what do you expect? That's just part of being a woman. And you're like, oh, That is so sad.
Happens a lot.
So,
Unfortunate.
it's so unfortunate. And so there's a hormone production cascade called the the steroidogenic hormone production cascade. So the liver makes LDL cholesterol. They call cholesterol the mother of all hormones because cholesterol will then turn into all these important hormones, such as the estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone, brain sleep hormone, all these important ones, including cortisol, which they call the stress hormone made by the adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidney. So what tends to happen is things are going on in the body that are starting to drive chronic disease. Things, why do I have stuff? And it starts creating physical stress to the system. Now, excessive emotional, spiritual stress and physical stress will tend to kick cortisol up into the stress mode. Now, cortisol is designed to go up, down, up, down, up, down with any kind of stress. Very stressful day at work, it was up, but now it comes down. I'm with my loving family and my dogs. I just stubbed my toe. Boy, that hurts. Ouch, ouch. Oh, okay, now it comes down and my body gets rid of that pain. But with all these other kind of things, cortisol can get kicked up and get stuck in the stress mode. Then what happens is your body's under stress and duress, and it's very hard to fix things. You tend to get one thing after another. But also what happens is cholesterol tends to shunt towards cortisol production. And then you're in a position to stop making these other hormones. And typically the first one that's going to start dropping is progesterone. And then you start getting this estrogen dominance. And then as things progress, what tends to happen is there's gut disruption. The gut's a very central mechanism, including the gut is the main organ of detoxification. So when a woman makes healthy new estrogens to do all that wonderful stuff we said before, once it's been in your system for a while, that estradiol, that estrone gets dinged, it gets beat up, and now it's irritating and toxic to the system. So you got to run your detox pathways. You got to dump toxins into the gut. You got to put them in the toilet. But when the gut becomes disrupted with what they call the intestinal permeability disorder, or more common lingo, the leaky gut, what tends to happen is things that are in the intestines, toxic things, get reactivated and reabsorbed back into the bloodstream and build over time, including these toxic old estrogens. So then you get this double whammy where you're low on progesterone and now you're accumulating toxic old estrogens. And then you start seeing all these rev without clone, hormonal menstrual things. You see somebody's future. It doesn't look great. Let's fix it now before it gets there. And you sleep like a baby. You're all chill. You don't have the hormonal menstrual things, and it makes things so much better. And you've done your due diligence to prevent future health issues.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I think just helping to define the pathway that cortisol goes down and that effect from the liver of really just how hormones, how kind of the interplay, so to speak, between all of that is so helpful because it then brings into the conversation some of the things that a lot of people have been noticing, specifically as it relates to inflammation, thinking about blood glucose levels, insulin levels, and the interplay it also has with cortisol and the effect that it has on our levels of inflammation. I know one of the things I hear very often from people when they are initially diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder or they have been told that they have high levels of inflammation is that, oh, I should go on keto or I should go on intermittent fasting or something to basically get their glucose levels under control. What is your recommendations regarding dietary changes for inflammation and autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, thank you. So when you're talking about like stress hormone cortisol, you're talking about a lot of different things that can create excessive stress, including cortisol. When the body's under stress and duress, it throws off insulin and blood sugar control. And so if you have blood sugar control issues, you also want to ask why. And now it can have a very tight connection with dietary. Unfortunately, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, is incredibly sad and involves way too many carbs, not enough protein. And so this is where you're hearing a lot of people talking about like ketogenic diet, where you flip to more protein, less carb. And that is a really good place to start. If you're not very good at controlling inflammation, simple carbohydrates, which are basically sugar, are really hard for the body to deal with. Ideally, the body should go, okay, carbs are food. whether it's carbs, fats, fatty acids, protein, it's all food. I'm just going to use it for fuel and then power up the system and do work. If you have a disrupted system and insulin resistance, you can't control blood sugar, then those carbs are very challenging to deal with. And then you start creating all this inflammation. So it's lovely to start making those nutritional changes where I really increase my proteins, ideally really healthy proteins, high quality foods. You don't really want a lot of the highly processed foods, the fast foods. I don't even call those technically foods. I call them food-like products because they're not even food. They're just food-like kind of the things. They fool us because they look like food. They're not even food. They don't got any nutrients. And so that's a great way to go. And then you hear things like, well, let's try to control stress better. How about I do some deep breathing, some meditation, some repetitive prayer, progressive muscle relaxation. Anything we do to help the body find calm is going to put the body in a better place to heal, including Harvard did a study about 16 years ago. I think now, or two previous studies, the second one in India, has suggested that meditation works through epigenetics. And so then Harvard said, hey, we're Harvard. If anybody's going to figure this out once and for all, it's going to be us. So we'll get our best researcher on it. And sure enough, oh my gosh, meditation genes. And they go, oh my gosh, this is so cool. What genes does it flip? Oh, it flips the genes that are involved in inflammation, controlling inflammation versus letting it run rampant. And they go, this is why meditation is basically good for everything, because you're flipping genes the right way in every cell in the body at the same time.
We're chatting with Dr. David Bilstrom. He is quadruple board certified in functional and regenerative medicine, integrative medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and medical acupuncture. Dr. Bilstrom, before we get ready to conclude our time, because I could talk to you forever, love this conversation. One of the things that I want to make sure that we at least touch on is the conversation of supplementation. I have some patients who come in with probably 20, no less than 20 different supplements because they're wanting to replace all the things. However, I find that there are some that tend to be persistently low in a lot of people, particularly magnesium and vitamin D. What is the most recent research you're seeing regarding these two different areas, particularly when they're deficient?
Yeah, thank you. So when you see people come in with 20, 30, 40, 50 supplements, when I look at the supplements, I can go, oh my gosh, this person has done their homework. Everyone that they're on, I know what they read to start that. That is fantastic. But what they're doing is going after the symptoms. This is really good for this symptom and this one. And what they tend to miss is the real big central mechanisms. And this is why they end up still seeing, let's say myself, because they're on 50 things that they missed the biggest stuff. And this is one we're trying to teach people is what is the biggest stuff? Where am I going to get the biggest bang for my effort? So vitamin D and nutrients such as magnesium, these are basically the things the body needs to make things and fix things and be happy and healthy. And without them, you can't fix things and be happy and healthy. So vitamin D is a huge one. If you Google search on PubMed, which is a big clearinghouse for all the scientific articles, I think last like 8 years ago, I was telling people there's already over 11,000 articles about vitamin D. And now we're probably talking like 110,000. But it's, oh my gosh, and it's such a central mechanism. But with vitamin D, the other central mechanism is vitamin D receptors. And so every cell in our body has a receptor for vitamin D because every cell in the body needs vitamin D. So vitamin D has got to be there, the right amount, and then it has to be able to attach the receptor to tell the cells what to do. But vitamin D receptors, particularly in the gut, when they become resistant to vitamin D, oh my gosh, is that a mess? Now vitamin D cannot attach. And it's almost like you don't have vitamin D. And there's 3 supplements that we use to fix that. We call them the foundational triad: vitamin D every day, probiotics, and then something called butyrate. And butyrate is naturally occurring. It's called the short chain fatty acid. It should be made by the good bacteria in our gut, not just for the gut, but for everything. And when you lose the vitamin D receptor resistance, it's inflammation. So you fix it. The original data was, oh my gosh, this is exactly what you want to do to reverse autoimmune disease of the gut, like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, recurrent C. diff and H. pylori infections. And then they say, it also looks like this fixes the gut in a way that fixes everything. It looks like what you want to do to fix everything. The researchers, I can shout out to my med school, University of Illinois in Chicago campus, 6 months later, those same researchers go, oh my gosh, this is a quote unquote nuclear weapon against metabolic syndrome, obesity, cholesterol issues, and insulin blood sugar. And then the Harvard Journal of Psychiatry a couple of years later go, wow, if you can fix the intestinal microbiome this way, and I look at that, I go, well, that's what happens when you fix this vitamin D receptor resistance stuff. You can treat major depressive disorder. Another psych journal, hey, this impacts personalities. People become more outgoing and more social. And you're like, holy cow, that is huge, including when it comes to autoimmune prevention. There are certain genes that predispose people to type 1 diabetes, certain genes that predispose people to autism. You want to turn them off. It turns out those genes are what they call vitamin D responsive genes. When you get vitamin D, you have healthy vitamin D receptors. It attaches. The vitamin D receptors release another protein called vitamin D responsive elements. They go to those genes that predispose to autism and type 1 diabetes, turn every one of them off at the same time. That epigenetic stuff is so cool. So you can see when you get these central mechanisms, it just impacts everything. And so we end up doing the same. Everything you're on, you are brilliant. You figured it out, but you missed these central mechanisms. That's why you haven't got the big bang to your effort. We had this, oh my gosh, cascade of the body just being able to fix everything at the same time.
This has been such a great conversation and really helping people see how they can choose better health by understanding the central mechanisms really behind the disease processes that they're experiencing. I want to make sure that people know how to get in contact with you, how to learn more about your services and your resources. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
So my website is drdavidbilstrom.com. And from there, we have multiple levels of courses for medical and non-medical people, blog posts, over 150 different videos about the science behind this. We really want to educate people why this happens, but then give them the tools that they can really start dealing with this stuff themselves. There's practitioners out there that can help them, of course, but if they have the tools themselves and the body is so smart and knows how to heal, a lot of people can feel profoundly better all by themselves.
This has been excellent. I hope that you take some time to dive deep into Dr. David Bilstrom's website. So much information there, blog posts and other resources. We will link to them in the show notes. Dr. Bilstrom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Until next time, everyone, live fully, love boldly, and rest intentionally.